11 years starting to indulge in drug and substance abuse. But there are not so many. These ones are the unique cases, but they are there. We acknowledge that they are there. But by the time we get to around Form 3, Form 4, this is when the manifestations become very real. By the ages of 15, 16, going upwards, this is when you then start to see a pattern of drug and substance abuse, not only from influence from the family setup, but also influenced by peers around them who have probably, you are at a school, there's a primary and a secondary school, and you probably had 3 to 4 grade 6s and 7s who used to indulge in that. They transition to the secondary school, which is closest to them, and they're just 3 or 4 of them. By the time they get to Form 3, Form 4, they have recruited, peer pressure. They have recruited in excess of 40, 50 others who are also now thinking that it is something that must be admired. It is something that will make them live in another sort of reality. But, the painful and catastrophic thing about it is soon after they take the drugs or the substances, a day later, whatever situation they thought they were running away from will still be there. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've mentioned the family setup, and we actually talked about the family system as well, and how it's also playing a role maybe in not exactly addressing some issues that children may be experiencing, right? And so maybe looking at family, are there any hotspots as well for the uptake of drugs and substances? My hotspots are not identified that are near like certain schools or yeah.
Yes, definitely. Most of our hotspots, in fact, we have categories of schools. Let me start there so that you're able to understand where we're coming from. We've got what we call P3 schools or S3 schools. These are schools that are under-resourced. They are in the rural and remote areas. And, these are the rural schools in remote areas. Then we've got what we call, when we say P, we mean primary. When we say S, we mean secondary. Then we've got P2 and P and S2 schools. These are your peri-urban schools or your high-density schools. The Glenviews, the Budiriros, the Heathcliffs, the Epworths, the Mavukus, and just the schools in outlying areas. These are your S2 or your P2 schools. Then you've got your P1 and S1 schools. These now are your more resourced schools, and they begin from levels of, let's say, talking of Harare, we're talking of, let's talk of Roosevelt, Memorial Girls Eye, Prince Edward, Ellis Robbins, Churchill, going up to the St. George's, the Lomagundis, the Peterhouse, the St. John's, the Falcons. Well, the Lomagundis and the Falcons, they're sort of like in rural areas, but we classify them under S1 because of their resources. Now, when you look at it, the S3 schools, they are more exposed to very cheap illicit brew as a drug, which is very cheap. I think it's $1 for 2 little pockets, 2 little plastic pockets. So it's really, really cheap. So if you give your child pocket money and perhaps you've given them 50 cents and then that one has got 50 cents, they buy. And doesn't really have the exact alcohol content. The alcohol content could be in excess of 60, 70% for a small little bottle. So it takes them very quickly, and it is very addictive. And it's very cheap. There's also the brews, the illicit brews that are brewed in rural areas, the Nipas, the Cachasus, the Toriros, and so on and so forth. Those are also, very highly addictive drugs. But you find them mainly exposed for those in the S3 and P3 category. Then we come closer to the peri-urbans, the S2, the P2 schools. You still find, you may not find them toriros, but you will find such drugs as they call it kambwa, the ones in the little plastic bottles. You find the bronchliers with the codeine, and codeine is a substitute for heroin. So it is highly, highly addictive. It's supposed to be a cough syrup, but these are the sort of drugs that you then get. And then you also definitely will start to see more impacts of marijuana, mbanje, which is, sold very cheaply as well. And it is a bit widespread amongst those categories. Then we get to our S1 and P1 schools. Perhaps I may exonerate the P1 schools a little bit, but when we go to the S1 schools, the worrying trend that we find is that now we are having some of our pupils indulging in hard drugs. We're not talking of hard drugs, we're now not talking of the toriro, the imbwa or marijuana. We're talking of, when we talk of hard drugs, we're now talking of cocaine, we are talking of LSD, we are talking of heroin. Those are the drugs that you find in some of these well-resourced schools because it's not cheap, right? Even to maintain that habit. And because they come from very affluent families, they've got all this. So they are able to then have excess money, which they then purchase these hard drugs. But these hard drugs really, really do them down. Because someone with an otherwise very promising future, you find them crumbling at A level or even O level. They go nowhere. They cannot proceed with their education because they are really addicts. Sometimes they're in the classroom and you can really see that this is not the tatenda that I'm used to. And it's not just the boys, even girls are into it, particularly in the S3 schools. And this is the worrying trend. So these are the demographics that you have of how prevalent our drug and substance abuse is within our education sector.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it also helps us have an appreciation of the fact that, it's not only a certain class of people that are affected by this, but each and every person is also, somewhere, somehow they fit in there. Now you've classified the different, the S3, P3, and, So I want to know, in terms of accessibility, right? You have mentioned that in Kuma P1, S1, the type of drugs that they have access to are much more expensive. They're hard drugs, right? But in terms of accessibility, how do they even access these drugs? Because I'm asking for a parent who is watching, who is probably giving their child pocket money every single day, but they probably have no idea which pocket money actually, how are they going to be using it at school? So how do they even access these drugs?
Well, the biggest challenge that we have noticed is that there are certain drug lords that hover around our schools and entice our children with these drugs. So if they've got cocaine or LSD, they hang around those schools where these boys are or go attend their sporting activities, whether it's a rugby match, it's a basketball match, and they're there, or they hear that there's a party somewhere. That's when they're exposed to these drugs. The drug lords are someone like you and me, right? Someone like you and me who's just getting in there saying, I'm selling a product, you want it. And most of the drug lords, they don't even indulge or consume the drugs themselves because they have a policy that you never get high on your own supply. Right, so if you got a supply, you supply it so that you make money. And they're there. You go to the S2s and P2s, you've got those, for lack of a better word, they call them managersmen. They are known. You go to the townships, the locations, you know who's the jazzman here, who's the jazzman there. And there are certain signs which they show like they've adopted the American system. If you go and you see the power lines and then there are two little shoes that are hanging. Don't think those shoes are lost or they've been stolen or they went by those power lines by mistake. Okay. It's a sign that drugs are sold here. Do you understand? And you find this mainly in the townships and in the locations. Then when you go to the S3s and the P3s, well, that it's common cause. You know, kuti pamba pamainingi, panobikwa mtoriro, panotengeswa zvakati. It's up to the parents now to say to their children, no, we don't want you hanging around those areas. Because you see, some of the things that actually happen when they consume those drugs are really and pretty much disgusting. And they are mortifying, particularly for the girl child. Because most of the girls then wake up and they do not know what really transpired the previous night after having taken whatever sort of drug from the rural and remote areas to the townships to the leafy suburbs. They wake up not knowing what happened the previous night or who's been with them. Mm-hmm. It's the same with the boys. They don't know what has happened to them. They have got memory loss. This is the greatest downside of drug and substance abuse, is memory loss for our children. Once they are in the zone, they forget everything that would have transpired. You can tell them that, you know, that this is what happened. They have got no clue. Yeah. And it becomes addictive. Mm-hmm. And someone like that is not someone who's very constructive. It's not someone who's going to say, whom you're going to say, can we please do this? Can we make sure that you go to school so that you become an engineer, you become a doctor, so that you can become a lawyer, so that you can become an artist? Why don't you think this would add better to your musical career? They've got, that completely destroys them. And then at the end of it all, they then just become paupers who are begging this relative and that relative. They become violent. They destroy even what their parents have built for them. So drug and substance abuse is a scourge that we completely need to nip in the bud.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. You mentioned that, you know, the telltale signs of maybe in certain neighborhoods, how we can identify that this may be a drug base, right? Mm-hmm. And we've mentioned parents, right? But I want to move on to teachers. At schools, are teachers equipped with knowledge on maybe how to even identify some of these drugs, or how to maybe deal with if they know that, okay, if they suspect maybe that there may be some behavior that's pointing towards drugs being present in the school? Have teachers been equipped with that kind of knowledge?
Yes, most of our teachers are aware of any learner or pupil who's indulged in drug and substance abuse. They're adults, they're quick, they're also parents, remember. Mm-hmm. They can tell very quickly that, no, this one is drunk. This child, they know the signs. Sometimes they may not know how to stop it because perhaps it's now just manifestation, right? The majority of our teachers are that good. But it's not all teachers who are like that. Because unfortunately, drug and substance abuse also affects some of our teachers, right? So when they see someone like that, perhaps they're also in that zone. Now it's very difficult for you to manage a situation when you yourself are indulging in drug and substance abuse, and yet you're supposed to take care of children in our schools. So these are some of the teachers that we are trying to also weed out from our system. Yes, a number of them, because it's very clear most of the teachers who indulge in drug and substance abuse, they end up losing their jobs because they will not turn up for duty on the Monday after payday. They will not turn up for duty for a week if they've got some money, and they may not just do their work. Absolutely. They may be given several warnings until they are finally dismissed. So they lose their jobs due to drug and substance abuse. And this is not something that you have to admire. So this is why we have the majority of our teachers who are well behaved, and they know that, no, I may drink, but I'm not supposed to drink or come to the classroom drunk. Actually, it's our policy. If you are a teacher and you still feel that you have got a hangover, you had too much to drink the previous evening or on the Sunday evening, it's better for you to call in sick than to come into the classroom reeking of alcohol. Alcohol, just alcohol, we're not talking of the other drugs, and trying to impart any sort of education into our pupils. Because just your very stature may be admired by some misled pupils who think that it is admirable for you to be drunk like that. So it's better for you not to even come to the classroom. Call in sick, recuperate, and then come back to the classroom the following day when you're okay and you're sober. And when you're okay and you're sober, you are then able to pick out those pupils who are taking drugs or substance abuse.
Yeah. Thank you so much for speaking on teachers. We once had a discussion with some youths who were actually sharing on how they feel different institutions are affected by this menace. And this whole subject of teachers actually came up in the sense that, they expressed that they may be like in certain schools, they actually know that maybe the teachers know, or the headmaster knows that there are certain vendors in the school who actually sell drugs. And so maybe that's something I would like to get your response on. In terms of having vendors inside schools, do we have any sort of, restrictions or, do we have any restrictions that we put in terms of the vendors that should be allowed in schools, and what are the parameters?
Yes, our policies are very clear where we go to schools that are well managed. It's a question of leadership. So one school will differ from another school that is 1 kilometer away because of the head of the school. There is a school where vendors, you will not see them, not even outside the school gate. They're not in the school, and even outside the school gate, they won't be there. Because the head of the school is very clear that I don't want any vendors inside my school or just outside my schoolyard. I don't want them, because I do not know what you may end up selling to my children. You may end up even selling cigarettes, making them look like it's harmless. And then you may even start dealing in other little drugs, little tumbwas, right? That's another head. And the head will say, look, I have a tuck shop full of all the tack that children need, all the fizzy drinks, all the chips, bubble gums, and sweets that children need, maputi, and so on and so forth, which is well run and professionally run within the premises of the school. There are schools like that, plenty of them. Then you will get other schools where there is a certain laxity by the head of the school to allow vendors just outside the gate of the school. Now, that can it can be a telltale sign of anything. This could be drug laws. They could be genuine vendors. But on the other hand, they could be those who are selling drugs to our children, waiting for them just outside the gate. As they come out, they are sold for $1. You get 2 kambwas. For $1, you get a bowl of marijuana, whatever it is. Because it's easily accessible to them, and they also hide this by putting, some chips, some sweets, as if they're selling just that, and yet they're selling much more than that. But it takes leadership, and we're appealing to all the heads of schools to ensure that they strictly monitor the movements of our vendors, the movements of our children, as they go outside the school and come back into the school. There are some who leave during lunchtime and then come back for sporting in the evening, in the afternoon. When they come back, some of them you can see that when he left the classroom around 1, he was okay. But when he's coming in to do sports, he's making some sort of noise that was not there before. He has already met with a drug lord who has supplied him or her, and then comes to cause commotion within the school. It all depends with the school leadership. We do not have situations, obviously, where we have vendors within the school premises, unless there are those schools that are doing it. Please, will you advise the youth to inform the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education so that we can deal with those issues. We do have certain cases, however, of certain teachers who sell sweets, biscuits inside the classroom. And that is not allowed. So we also say, because at the end of the day, if it's your teacher, you feel obliged to purchase from your teacher. There's a certain obligation to purchase from your teacher. Just imagine if the teacher is then decides to start to sell drugs or some substances, illicit substances. If it's a class of 40 pupils, they feel compelled because this is Mrs. Campbell, she's selling this to us. Why don't we just, buy for the sake of helping our teacher? There's that connection between a pupil and a teacher, in which a pupil really respects the teacher. Sometimes, in most cases, more than they respect their parents at home. So when the teacher comes and says, I'm selling this, just bring $1. And I give you 2 and then you try it. What do you think is going to happen? So we have said, no, we don't want anyone selling anything within the classroom. The school has got a tuck shop, which is managed by the school administration, and the head knows what is being sold at the tuck shop. There's no vendor allowed within the school premises. There should be no vendor allowed just outside the school premises. Schools are for learning. Schools are for receiving quality education. Schools are for effective teaching. That's why they were built, and that's why they're there. Anything else around the school is there to disturb our education system.
Well, yeah. And I think we were all listening on, if we do identify some of these things happening in schools, please do be forthcoming with this information, because it also helps in order for us to stop the scourge of drugs in our schools. So there's also another issue as well that was mentioned by the youths in terms of children's mental wellness. You mentioned about quality education, and quality education is holistic, right? And there are concerns that maybe we might not be paying enough attention to children's mental wellness in schools, and this maybe then drives them to start taking drugs. Do we have anything in place in our schools that addresses mental wellness in our children?
Okay, let me be very, very clear on this one. We have got a very progressive, very robust guidance and counseling system within our schools. Each and every school has got a guidance and counseling committee. Some of the schools even have what you call a guidance and counseling room, classroom, where there'll just be a teacher there, and if you feel that you need to express or you need to, talk about something, you just go to that classroom at whatever time and say, ma'am, sir, I'm not feeling okay because of this and that and this and that and this. And then the teacher acts like a parent and guides you through the processes of what you should do. So we've taken it very seriously. It actually starts from the head of the school. The assemblies that we have at our schools, guidance and counseling starts from there. You hear a good leader who is a head of a school who start talking about drug and substance abuse and its effects at assembly. By the time you get to the classroom, the teacher is also talking about it. And then there are also structures where if you really feel that you need some counseling or guidance for your mental health, there are teachers who are readily available in a classroom that is empty, in rooms that are private. And you can be able to vent whatever you need to vent, to say, look, I'm facing this challenge. I've got friends who are doing this. I've got peers who are forcing me into this. I'm not interested. And how do I go about it? And they are guided on how to make sure that they do not have a mental breakdown. The reason why our mental health strategies for mental health have been quite a success. You will notice that we've got very, very few or next to none, on very negligible number of suicides amongst our pupils. That's from pupils, we've got about 5 million to 6 million of them. But in a year or 2 years, you may have 1 or 2 stories, which is a tiny drop in the ocean. But go to the other countries, children are killing themselves. They're hanging themselves, they're overdosing, they're even overdosing on drugs. But within the Zimbabwe school system, because we have got a very robust guidance and counseling session and program, we have managed to keep suicides at a bare minimum. If a child kills themselves, it's big news in Zimbabwe, because we have to find out what went wrong. Who did he or she fail to talk to? Because if you look at the cases of suicide right now, these are married men and women. These are men with families. These are women with families. But you rarely find it within our school system, because we've got a very robust guidance and counseling program.
Absolutely, and I absolutely agree with that. And in terms of, just talking about maybe what you have in place in assisting pupils, recently His Excellency President Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa launched the multi-sectoral drug and substance abuse plan, and I'm sure and I know that different sectors of the government are feeding into that, right? So maybe you can just briefly take us through how the Ministry of Education is feeding into that in order to maybe educate or inform some people who may not even be aware that something like that exists.
Okay, we must applaud His Excellency the President, Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, for launching that multi-sectoral drug and substance plan, drug and substance abuse plan, which will run from 2024 to 2030. To inform that plan, we as the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education were some of the first ones to say, look, we need an all hands on deck approach, because our children were becoming drunkards. Our children were abusing drugs and illicit substances. And in his wisdom, His Excellency set up a national task force headed by the Minister of Defense. Why the Minister of Defense? Because drug and substance abuse is a security threat. It's a national security threat. Imagine, I said we've got 5 to 6 million pupils. 1 million of them come drunk, get some hold of some guns, and just start shooting. For instance, what do you think is going to happen to our country? It's a security threat. So this is how high His Excellency took it. That no, drug and substance abuse is actually a security threat. This should be under the Ministry of Defense. And the Honorable Minister of Defense, Comrade Opamchiguri, is the one who is the national chairperson of that task force. Because we had pleaded as the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education that, you know what, we cannot do it alone. We need all government arms to come in and assist us. But some of the drugs are being accessed outside the school system. Some of the drugs are being accessed during weekends, outside schooling hours. That's when our children are being exposed to these drugs. But when they come to the school system, they manifest that they have taken some drugs and illicit substances. And it's very now difficult to control someone that you did not see before, that, okay, fine, it seems like this one is drunk. But we should have stopped it when the person was actually drinking or taking drug and substance abuse. Because some of them, you see the manifestations in high cases of bullying. I think you've seen that. Viral videos of children beating up each other over small little issues. Within the school system, they fail to do that because we've got a very strong system against bullying, against drug and substance abuse. As soon as they leave the school setup, they are fighting. In 1 year, there were kids, I think was it in Bluffhill, who ended up murdering themselves. Yes, these are effects of drug and substance abuse, which then go on to bullying, and then which then destroy the ethos and the fabric of our society. So as the Minister of Primary and Secondary Education, we could not do it alone. This is why we're very grateful for what His Excellency has done for the entire nation to make sure that he launches a multitasker. If it means all government arms are involved. Every parent, it is the duty of every parent. It takes a village to raise a child. Right? A village, not just Mrs. Kambeo to raise a child. No, it's the whole village. And if the whole village sees that Mrs. Kambeo's child is getting drunk, Ms. Tindoro should be able to discipline that child. So we are using a whole of government approach, and we are proud of the results that we are achieving so far. As the Minister of Primary and Secondary Education, what we can assure you as parents is that we're very strict when it comes to that. At every school gate, as if we are in COVID eras, as if we're taking your temperature by the gate, we are searching each and every pupil's bag to find out whether they have any sort of drugs. And if they do, we call the parent, and together we try and provide psycho support for that learner to make sure that they realize what they're doing to themselves and to the community and to their family, that it is not good. They are losing their own lives, which is just right ahead of them. Obviously, when cases become a little bit more acute, we have to involve other partners for rehabilitation. But as far as our schools are concerned, you will not find drug and substance abuse occurring at a maximum within our schools, because we have got strategies in place from the gate to the classrooms to the toilets and everywhere. And we have got very strict disciplinary measures that we are taking to curb the scourge of drug and substance abuse.